Welcome to the Dr. Donna podcast, here on the Experience of the Soul podcast channel. Innovative, evidence-based recovery that helps to identify intergenerational trauma, allowing for freedom and embracement of the healing process. Today, episode 118, Revisiting Emotional Immaturity, Part 2. And now your host, Dr. Donna Bevan-Lee.
This is Dr. Donna. Welcome to my podcast. I've been going over some of the material that I started out my podcast with when I was doing Healing Your Family Legacy. And I'm going through that again, not in the same way, but I'm going through that again because it has been requested. And last week I talked about childhood trauma, what that was when a child's in a constant state of fear, how it impacts a child's developing brain. And I talked about repression because where I left off was that there are defenses that children create that helps them survive in intolerable situations. And repression is when you just don't remember. You can't pull something up out of your memory bank to know about and think about. And repression is it's just not there. And it could be because you didn't know what it was. It could be because it's too traumatic for you and your body's busy freezing and your brain is busy freezing or distracting itself and it just doesn't go in. So today I'm going to talk about suppression. And suppression is that defense mechanism that when you're saying, well, I don't think I want to know this. Your brain is saying, it's like a gatekeeper, it says, oh, I don't think I want to know this. I know, but I don't know. That's kind of how that works. And when you are experiencing suppression, you are, it's like you can be, say, being abused in some way. But you say, I really don't want to know about this. And so you either, distract yourself in some way. La, 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 I'm not here. Oh, I wonder if I did my history assignment for tomorrow, right? When something really bad is happening. And so you're actually aware, but you're not aware. And I gave a great example of how children use suppression as a defense mechanism. And I'm going to give an example of what a suppression looks like when you're a child. So use this example. I'm going to use it again, where this woman, again, is like, well, I think there's something going on. I have issues around my sexuality. And a lot of it is around sexuality, because a lot of children are sexually abused, whether or not the parent is trying to abuse them or whether or not the neighbor is trying to abuse them. Because, you're a child and things happen. And when you're looking at this for yourself, just let me tell you this, because I gave a talk at an international AA or all recovery group. And I was talking about this, and I was talking about children being abused and all that. And of course, somebody asked me after it was over, well, the first thing out of her mouth was, well, I know I was abused. My parents, though, they did the best they could because blah, 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 and she started giving them excuses. And I just want to say again, I know most of the time parents are doing the best they can. I am a parent, and I know that I did the best I could. I would no more injured my son on purpose than fly to the moon back. It just wouldn't happen, okay? So I have empathy for parents and adult children who are looking at their own lives and saying, that happened, but I know they didn't do it on purpose. I get that. And this suppression is one of the defense mechanisms that children create in order to deal with that. They kind of know that it's not on purpose, but it's happening anyway. All right. So anyway, she went through this whole thing and she said, I just can't identify anything. And then she said, but there was this one thing, and that's usually how it happens. There was this one thing where, we lived in situations that were, and I'm talking about myself, okay? So she said, we were living in situations where it was not clean. We didn't have really clean water. We tried, my parents tried in every way to make it acceptable, but it wasn't a clean place. And the kids would get pinworms. Now, for those of you that don't know what pinworms are, they're little worms that you get when you are eating food that has been, that there's might have been feces involved or, water that's not clean. And these pinworms get into your system, and they're little teeny worms that have little hooks on the end, and they get through your system, and then they get hooked on your rectum as you're trying to poop. Okay. And then they cause a lot of problems. So she talked about having these pinworms, and I was like, oh God, that really sounds awful. And she said, well, it was, but they gave us these pills and, it would clear up the pinworms. But the doctor told my parents that once in a while they had to make sure that those worms were gone. And so periodically they'd have to come in, and this was what the doctor told her to do. And this was a long time ago. I don't know if they would still do this, but, in the night after it was dark and the kids were asleep, they'd come in with a little flashlight and look in their, pull down their little pants and look in there to see if the pinworms were gone, because you could only see them at night when it was dark. And as soon as she said it, she said, even though they weren't trying to abuse us, that really was a violation of our sexual boundaries. And I go, yeah, I think it was a violation of your sexual boundaries, because, it's like they were in there in the night doing what people do when they sexually abuse children. Whether they tried to do it or not, that's what happened. And so that would be a suppressed memory. It's like she knew, but because of her child mind, when it happened, the meaning that she gave to it was, yucky, this is awful. I wish they wouldn't do this, but I know the doctor told them they needed to and didn't even really know why. So this wasn't, a parent being a pedophile. This was a parent doing what the doctor said to do. That's just how it went. But here's the deal. It still had the same impact. It impacted her sexual behavior with her spouse. And it was like, yeah, we run into these problems. I know it's me, it's not him. And then when she was able to work through it, it was still a scar, okay? She still knew that it existed. She still knew that she might have a reaction. But it was easier for him because now he knew that, oh yeah, she keeps telling me it's not about me, but now we know what it's about. I really accept that it's not about me. And she would say, well, when I feel this feeling of tightening up, now I know that it's not about now. It was about then. And I can calm myself. And I don't have to have that reaction in that moment. Okay, so it takes a little more energy when you're recovering from this. It takes a little more energy and a little more self-awareness for you to know and understand what the work is about, is to know, to understand, but also there's a piece, which I will talk about, where there's emotional energy or feelings that don't belong to you. Because, of course, even in that situation where the parents weren't trying to hurt these children, the children still felt like it was their fault. Like, if we would be better kids, then this wouldn't have happened. And so they had to get rid of that feeling of shame, like something's wrong with me. And that's the work that you do. Either you could do it when you read my book, Iron Legacy, Childhood Trauma and Adult Transformation, or you can get with a therapist that knows what the heck they're talking about when they're talking about childhood trauma. If you have a therapist that hasn't asked you what your childhood trauma was, not if you had trauma, but what it was, then you probably need to find someone that does ask the question right away. Because if you walk into a therapist's office and announce, well, I have all these, I have got all this depression and I've been drinking too much and blah, blah, blah. And the therapist doesn't ask you at some point after you get at least the alcohol, what's your childhood trauma? They don't get it either. Because you can put more Band-Aids on that. It's not going to help. Might for a little while, but it won't. For the long haul. No, it won't. I'm going to talk about denial. That's a big time defense mechanism. Adults use it all the time. Adults use all these all the time. But if you have a tendency to deny reality, well, I didn't do that. Let's say that it's like out of the clear blue sky, you hit your child because they were doing something that you didn't want them to do. And you told them not to do it, and they did it anyway. And you whacked them, and you're horrified. Okay? Instead of saying, wow, I did that. I need to be accountable for that. If I don't know where that came from, I need to get myself in therapy right away. And take care of business so that I don't do that again. Okay? Part of my amends will be to get myself in therapy. Because I will apologize to the child and make sure they know that I did not, they did not deserve that. That was all my fault. At least that gets the child off the hook and they won't be sitting in the therapist's office probably. But if you say, I didn't do that. No, I didn't whack are you kidding? I wouldn't do a thing like that. I'm not a bully. That's called denial. You say, I didn't do that. And there it is right in front of you. That's called denial. People who are addicts absolutely know what denial is. No, I didn't, have too much to drink. Oh, no, I wouldn't put crap in my veins. I wouldn't put drugs in my veins. That's just not going to happen. No, I didn't mortgage the house because of my gambling problem. I wouldn't do a thing like, I don't know. It must be the mortgage company's problem. I'm going to make sure that they don't do that. I'm going to make sure they take that back. See, denial doesn't work because the people around you see that you're in denial. And if you stay in denial, at some point, they have to get out of it. What children do is that, it's like you ask, I worked in emergency rooms, for those of you who don't know that, for 4 years, and 2 major trauma centers. And one of my jobs in the emergency room was that if there was a suspected child abuse case, they called me. It's like, okay, we fixed the child. Now you go in there. I know it's child abuse, but you go in there and find out what happened. And, to interview children, you don't interview them the same way that you interview adults. You have to be very gentle, very careful, because the first thing they're going to do is say, my parents wouldn't hurt me. Dad didn't do that. Mom didn't do that. I don't know what happened. Or they give you some big story, which, it's like, okay, I don't think that happened. In your mind, okay? So say, let's talk some more. Because children will deny. Their whole, as a child, your whole focus in life is to survive. We are absolutely programmed to survive. And when you're a child, even if it's rough at home because parents are out of control, or, say you've got a really sick parent who's never well, and so the whole focus is on the sick parent and not on you, which it should be. Like I said, this isn't always about, parents doing bad things to their kids. Sometimes it's just, so then if somebody says, well, it's like you're not getting your needs met, it's like, oh no, I'm fine. It must feel kind of scary for you at home. Oh no, I'm fine. Children will not tell. It's called denial. And grown-ups are in denial all the time. Oh, wait, we just had an election where that happened. Oh, I didn't lose. We call that denial, okay? And some of that denial grown-ups do, and they try and make even bigger excuses for their behavior. Children do it too. In fact, grown-ups that do it probably learned how to do that as a child, or they watched a parent do that. So when you come out of denial, you recognize that I did this. I'm responsible for this. I need to be accountable for this. And I need to find out what's underneath it. And I need to stop doing it. As a therapist, that's what I would do. When people would come in and they would say, be in there because of a DUI. And they got, it's like, okay, well, I'm here because I have to get some therapy because I have a DUI. I said, do you think you have a drinking problem? And if they said, well, no, I just got one DUI, and it was because the cop was waiting around the corner, and they're always there, and I did, blah, 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 blah. And I say, okay, let's start out with the fact that I would say that 99% of all DUIs are not given to social drinkers. Maybe one might. It's like you go out and, have a bachelorette party and go home, and it's the only time you drank in your whole life, and you got a DUI. Okay, I'm with it. But most DUIs only happen to alcoholics. So I would say that's a lie you're telling yourself. And if you're going to work with me, you have to stop drinking. How do you want to do that? Here are your options. You can go to AA. You can go to, recovery groups of any kind all over the world. You can go on Zoom now to do it too. So you don't even have to leave the privacy of your own home. You can go to treatment. You can just stop if you can do that. It's like there's all kind of ways to do it. But don't come in here and say you're a social drinker if you have a DUI. It's not going to happen. And yes, I might be a little rigid in that. But, it's like if you're going to pay good money to get help for this thing that you have a problem about, I'm not going to do it while you are, in there talking to me about your childhood trauma that's underneath all this. Then you leave and go to your favorite bar and drink about it. Now, that would be a waste of money, time, and attention and effort, okay? So we're busting through the denial first. And if you are in a therapist's office, or you think you should be, or that you should be in a therapist's office, get out of denial right now and say, I got to find out what happened to me in my childhood to make me do these things. We're only accountable for what we do and what we say. It might be a few more years before we're accountable for what we think, because I used to say we're not accountable for what we think, but it seems that there's AI coming down the road, and for some reason, I can tell what we think, and that scares the crap out of me, but that's another story. The next defense mechanism I want to talk about is minimization. Minimization is simply this. When you say in your mind or out loud, it wasn't that bad. If you're inclined to say that, it's like, it was that bad. Because if it wasn't that bad, you wouldn't be trying to tell me it wasn't that bad. That's minimization. Okay? It's like, when you say that my childhood wasn't that bad, it means that it really was bad, but you've already You've read books about people who were seriously abused and beat up and sexually abused and locked in closets and everything else. And you say, wow, my childhood just wasn't that bad. Okay? So you've evaluated your own abuse. Otherwise, why are you reading that? If you're reading books about people who've been abused as children, it's probably because you've been abused and you're trying to find something to relate to. Otherwise, you're probably reading James Patterson or, reading the Buddha or something, but you're probably not all engrossed in that. How do I know that? Well, I'm a person, and when I get interested in something, it's usually something that is really important to me. I always remember back when in the 70s, I got really interested in nuclear warfare because all of a sudden it was like really clear. And when I was in a child, anyway, it's like this was part of my childhood drama. Duck and cover. In case we have a nuclear war, we had to get under our desks and cover our heads so that we wouldn't get killed. That was a little bit traumatic. And as I got older and, my brain got a little bigger and a little more connected, I did all the research I could find on nuclear war and nuclear bombs and what they were made of and blah. I knew more about nuclear stuff. And here I was, a psych and soc major with a minor in French. So it wasn't exactly on my agenda. But I was really interested in that. And part of that interest came from growing up in a era where bombs had already been dropped, and only a few years before I was born, those bombs were dropped. And so we were all concerned about civil defense, and here's a civil defense sign, and if the war happens, duck and cover, and then go find some civil defense. We had drills. That's a little bit dramatic for a child. And now there's drills on an active shooter in the hall. Do you think that there's going to be a child alive today that doesn't have trauma just because of that? Children shouldn't be having, active shooter drills in school. It terrifies them. Remember when I talked about what childhood trauma is? When a child is in a state of fear that they can't get out of. Oh boy, this is going to be a lot. There's going to be a lot of work that needs to be done. It's already happening. So, minimization, it's not that bad. Could be worse. If you're saying it, it's already that bad. So, the impact of that is that when you grow up, you have a tendency to accommodate really bad behavior. Okay? So you might be the one that's like, well, it happened to my sister or my brother or, my mother or my father or something else, but it didn't happen to me, so it wasn't that bad. So what do? You grow up and your spouse is either somebody that does the same thing or you do that same thing. And it's just not that bad. Okay, the next one is delusion. That's when you make up a new story about it. I had this one woman a long, long, long time ago who turns out she had multiple personality disorder. That's what and trust me, in 50 years of work, only had 2 people that actually had another personality besides the one they would show up with. And, when I first knew her, I knew there was something seriously going on here, but, besides the depression and the eating disorder and a whole list of things. But when I would ask her about her childhood, she'd give me this like glowing, well, it's like my room, you walk in and there were all these dolls that I had and all these games and books and, I'd be in there and I'd play with my dolls and my friends would come. She'd this idyllic childhood. And I said, that's just not real. But she was so invested in that, and that's how she survived. And it wasn't until a long time that I knew her that I accidentally found out that, from another one of her personalities, that it wasn't like that at all. That was a story she made up to survive. Because what was really going on was horrible. It was stuff of really bad nightmares, okay? And so, again, if you're in your therapist's office, there's a story. And, if you aren't searching to find what happened to you as a child, your therapist isn't doing their job. Find somebody that can. And how do you know? They ask you, so what happened to you as a child? What was it like at home, at school, at your next door neighbor, with your older cousins or older siblings? Was there a place that you didn't feel safe? Were there people that you didn't feel safe with? Let's talk about who was in your life. There are ways to find out. And you want that therapist that knows how to do that. Okay, we're going to keep talking about this next time. So again, my challenge to you is to ask, what happened to me? Who was in my life? What was going on really? And if I can't figure it out, how do I act now that makes me even question it? What do I think? What do I say? What do I do? Your thoughts, okay? You're only accountable for what you say and you do. Okay, I will see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Dr. Donna podcast here on the Experience of the Soul podcast channel. This channel is made possible because of listeners just like you. If you would like to support the channel with your tax-deductible contribution on an ongoing basis or through a one-time gift, head over to experienceofthesoul.com/support. The Dr. Donna podcast is copyright 2023 Dr. Donna Bevan-Lee, all rights reserved. Our theme music is composed by Dave Croft and used with permission. The Experience of the Soul podcast channel is a production of 818 Studios.
Hey friends, Sean here, your Experience of the Soul producer. I want to take a moment to tell you about something truly exciting. The SoulWorks online community, created by your host, Cynthia Alice Anderson, and available on the Mighty Networks app. If you're looking for a place where you can explore your spiritual path, connect with others, and grow in a meaningful way, then this is for you. SoulWorks is so much more than an online community. It's a safe, inclusive space for spiritual exploration, self-discovery, and personal transformation. Inside the community, you'll find everything from uplifting spiritual studies to soul-centered growth practices, meditations, affirmations, and so much more. It's a space where you'll always be supported and never judged. The best part, membership is free. You'll have access to powerful resources, inspiring content, and a supportive group of like-minded people who are all on their own unique spiritual journeys. And if you're ready to dive deeper, there are premium options available to enhance your experience with a live Monday night talk series and extended, deeper meditations. If you're seeking a place to connect, grow, and nurture your soul, we would love to have you join us in the SoulWorks community and see where this journey can take you. Visit my.soulworkscommunity.com today.